Welcome back. So in this video, we are finally going to be back to the DOM manipulation, and we're going to learn a couple of DOM manipulation techniques, and we'll use them together with for each method that we just learned about. So this is really exciting stuff. So let's get started. So firstly, we'll just go to our terminal and then we'll just live server. Okay, so this is the bank application which we just got. So we are going to build this to the final output. So we got our live web server running here. So let's get started. To start, let's actually open up our HTML and CSS files here. So index.html is done, and then CSS file as well, and also so we'll just keep these three files here. So for the quick access, so in our HTML file, as you can see here, the nav application here shows all of this top part, and then after that we have the main element, and that's basically the entire application here. So the part here which is right now invisible here, right? Okay, and so that's because in our CSS, as you can see here in the line 87, as you can see here it is opacity set to 0. So when you just keep this to 100, as you can see now, our bank is the app here, the which is built here. So by default, we are just getting this here, but we are going to make the changes and change this all. Okay, so we are hiding this application. So when we enter here, this details only user and pin, then only we need to access this. So let's just put it here back to opacity, and then you can just simply do this. And now the opacity is back to 100 because that we commented this. So 100 is the default, but anyway, let's go back to our script here. So now, so what we want to do now is basically display these movements right here. As you can see here, these movements which we have here. So we want these to be displayed here. Okay, in the application here in this container. So in the application, we need our this movements to be displayed here in this container. As you can see here, we'll be able to do that because of for each method which allows us to loop through this array, and in each iteration basically creates an element like this. Okay, and display it on the page. So this time we are going to finally move away from the console. That's why I just put this console down, so we don't require this for now. Okay, and actually we are going to do some DOM manipulation here right now. So let's just move down here after these elements here, but still inside of this app part of this file, then let's write our code. Now we could simply start writing our code out here in the global context. However, it is not a good practice. So whenever we do something like this, it's always best to create a function. So here I'll just say constant display moments equals to function of. So we call this parameter here moments, because the function should receive one array of movements and then work with the data. In this case, let's move that movements that it should display in the user interface right now. So it's a good practice to pass the data into function instead of for example, having this function work with the global variable. That would work as well, but it's a lot better to pass that directly into the function. Okay, again, instead of working with the global variables, so let's start passing the data that function needs actually into the function. So let me just say, as we call this function first to see what we'll get the output. So here I'm just saying display movements dot display movements of account one dot movements. So we'll just start writing the function here now. inside this function, let's loop over these movements now. So we'll just say movements dot for each of function here. Let's just say move and I here. Move is the current movement here and I is the index here. So starting with these movements, they are numbered as here 1 and 2 here. So starting with this first movement down and then adding the new ones on the top. So let's go to our HTML file here. So let's actually take a look at what does HTML looks like. So we are inside our app element here. Inside this app here we have the movement element, as you can see here. So as you can see here inside this movement, as you can see here, which is of all these containers here. And maybe it would be easier to see it in the console. So let me just inspect and show you this here in the console. As you can see here in our main class, which is the app. So in here we have the movements, as you can see here. As you can see here, the movements. So it is getting selected here, as you can see here, right? And also here we have the rows. Okay, and also we have the here the withdrawal and then the deposit due movements, as you can see here. That's how we just do that. So here I'm going to take this data from here to here. Okay, and then I'm copying it here. Let's just go back to our script here. So in here, coming back here, I'll just create here a variable called constant HTML here. So in here I'll just create a, and then here I'll just paste that here, and then let me just save it. And also coming back here now in this code, so here we don't require, this was updated 3 days ago, so we'll just do that later. For now we don't require, so I'm just removing this. Okay, and also here, as you can see here, the value which is getting here, the 4,000 euros, right? So we want that to be updated automatically from our move, right? So here we just move. So move. So this is coming from here. Okay, as you can see here, the move is the current element in the array that we are looping over and over in each iteration. That will then be the one of the movements in the array. And then we have the two deposits add here, right? So which is this. So let me just remove that here. And so we'll have to check whether a certain movement is a deposit or a withdrawal. So let's add here the number here so that you can see 1 or 2, so which we use it. So let me just say here 1 I plus 1. Okay, so that's why we need the current index beside the current value, which is here the I. Okay, and all we have to do here is basically replace this data that is not relevant for so this hard coded data with our actual movements data. Okay, so now this part here of the data we will not do that now. And then here we have the movements value here, right? So this is formatted, but again we'll just use the plain value that's coming out of the array, as we have already inserted here the move. And so as you can see here, we have the class movements value, class movements type, which we are getting from our HTML index. As you can see here, class type, class value here, these are the things which we have already before shown you when I inspected, right? So these are the class which will get selected here. Here before this HTML, let me just write here the code. Let me just say here so here we'll just say constant type here. I'm setting this here to move if move is greater than 0 here. So it needs to be the deposit, or else it needs to be withdrawal. Okay, so which is this here. Also down here we'll just say instead of deposit here we'll just use this term, which is the type, so which we wrote here. So it checks for whether it is the deposit or the withdrawal here. Okay, and also here let me just say here And now we need a way of knowing that if it is a deposited or withdrawal, right? So just by using this here, the ternary operator here. So we just did a separate variable here because we need that twice, and we just wrote it here once, and then here we just wrote it here. Why? Right? So it was twice we used here. And so here this class name depends upon that. So you see that we have the type deposit previously, which we just changed here to the type. So this is here in the green color, okay? And so that is here in this red color, as you can see here. So we'll need this information twice. So let's just calculate it outside here now. Let's just say here insert adjacent HTML. Outside here we'll just say dot insert adjacent HTML. So we created our HTML template here, right? As you can see here. See here this container app document, which is from our HTML file. So all we need to do is find a way of actually adding this HTML to the web page here. So we need to attach the HTML somehow into this container. So in this here, as you can see, movements element here. So we need to attach this HTML somehow into this container, into this movements element here, okay? And to do that, we'll actually use a method called insert adjacent HTML. So let me just first write the name of the method, then I'm going to tell you what we are actually have to attach this method. So it is called insert adjacent HTML container movements dot insert HTML. Here we say after begin, and then HTML. So the first string here is the position in which we'll attach the HTML. So to make it clear for you, let me just use the DOM here. So here, to make it clear, I'm just here using the MDN documentation. So MDN insert adjacent HTML. So when you come into this, as you can see here, so these are the four options here that we choose is the after begin here. And so this one, imagine this P element here is our container movement. And so basically I want to add this elements right here after the beginning of this element. So basically I'm saying here that I want to insert the new child element right here after the beginning of the parent element. So again, that contains movements, and then here we have the before end, which is the end of the elements, as the name says, that we can put it outside of the parents element, and then we could even put it outside of the container movements, and sometimes it is useful as well. But usually I always use after begin or before end, and once we see the result I will explain a little bit better. So why it's after begin and not a before end. But anyway, let's just go back. So coming back here, so let me just give it a save, and then here manually run it. Yeah, here it is the spelling mistake here. So when we run it, actually now you can see here the data files we just got. Now you can see here when we run this, so here we are getting all the data files here. So that worked perfectly fine. And coming back now, we need to specify the second argument, that is the string containing the HTML that we want to insert. So it works. So let me just check if with our values with the newest ones here. Let me just check here. As you can see here, we have the 1300 here. So the movements of the last element in the array here is the newest element here in our output here. As you can see here, 1300. So it works perfectly fine. Now, as you can see here, when we scroll down here, we'll see that we have these two old ones here. So basically the two that we already were there here. So that's so that's because all we are doing is here the add new elements to the container, right? We only inserting new elements here inside of this container movement. We are not overriding anything. So actually that has to be the first thing that we do. The first thing is to essentially empty the entire container and then we start adding new elements. So let's do something common to do. Here we'll just write our code, which is container movements dot. So we want our HTML to be here, right? So we are write inner HTML. So we are just setting this here to the null value. So that's we simply because so it is nothing but text content we are just setting here to 0. Okay, that means the same meaning. So when we run it actually now, as you can see here, the two things which were there by default here was cleared. Okay, so let me just now console log this now. So let me just say container movement dot inner HTML. So when I run this, as you can see here, when we inspect, here we have our console. All these was our HTML code here, as you can see here, which we just created by inserting these all values right now. Okay, so we don't require this now to, I just did this console.log just simply to show you. So let me just go ahead and turn this here off for now. We don't need that now. And finally, I wanted to show you why I used here the after begin instead of before end. So because let me just show you here, if I use the before end, see here when I did the before end, as you can see here, our last deposit here, which is getting here to the last base. So that's not how we want it, right? So when we deposit or withdraw, it always needs to be at the top, right, not in the bottom. So that's why here we used our after end because not before end. So that's how the difference is. So putting here this back to after end. So let's now move on with that. We are done with this DOM manipulation. So now we are going back to the order that we just came here. As you can see here, we just got to the default. So that's it for this video.